The deepest rethinking of life most often happens between the ages of 38 and 55. Not necessarily as a crisis, more often as an awakening. Until around the age of 35 to 40, many people live according to a script. Get an education, build a career, create a relationship, buy a home, achieve something, prove something to themselves and to others. And then suddenly a question arises: what comes next? Not because everything is bad, but because many goals have already been achieved. Or it has become clear that achieving them did not bring the happiness that was promised. And this is where a very interesting paradox appears. At 20, the main question is, how do I become someone? At 30, how do I achieve more? At 40, what is it that I actually want? At 50 plus, what do I want to spend the rest of my life on? At 70 to 80 plus, what in my life was truly important? Whom did I truly love? And what legacy am I leaving behind? And what is remarkable is that research shows that the feeling of happiness throughout life often follows a U-shaped curve. The lowest point of life satisfaction is usually between the ages of 45 and 55, after which the sense of happiness begins to rise again. In youth, the level of life satisfaction is usually quite high. There seems to be an endless number of possibilities ahead. Dreams have not yet collided with reality, and the future looks open and full of promise. Then come the years when a person takes on more and more responsibility: career, family, children, financial obligations, caring for loved ones, and the constant race for results. It is during this period that many people begin to feel tiredness, inattention, and disappointment. Not because life becomes worse, but because expectations collide with reality. In many countries, studies show that the lowest level of subjective happiness often occurs between the ages of 45 and 55. And it is precisely at this time that people most often begin asking themselves uncomfortable questions. Am I going in the right direction? What is all of this for? What is truly important to me? But then something unexpected happens. After this period, the level of life satisfaction begins to rise again for many people. Gradually, there is less need to prove something to others. There is more self-acceptance. A person gains a better understanding of what brings them joy and what they can let go of. More and more often comes the realization that happiness is not somewhere in the future, but in the simple things that have been there all along. That is why some psychologists call the midlife crisis not a crisis, but a transition. It is not the end of the story. It is the moment when a person begins to live not as others expected them to, but as they truly want to live themselves. For most of our lives, we live with the hope of happiness rather than happiness itself. We believe that happiness is somewhere ahead of us. It is waiting behind the next achievement, the next purchase, the next goal. When I finish my education, when I find love, when I get married, or when I earn more money, when I buy a house, when I lose weight, when my children grow up, when I retire. But if you look closely at this list, you may notice something strange. It never ends. As soon as one dream comes true, another takes its place. As soon as one peak is reached, the next one appears on the horizon. And one day, a person begins to understand something they had never noticed before. The problem was not that they had not achieved enough. The problem was that they kept postponing life until later. Researchers have found that older people often become happier, not because they have more opportunities. On the contrary, they have fewer opportunities, but it is not the world around them that changes. It is their attention that changes. They begin to understand the value of things that once seemed ordinary. An ordinary breakfast, a conversation with a loved one, a quiet evening, a walk, feeling well, another day of life. What was once taken for granted gradually begins to feel like a gift. And perhaps this is where the greatest secret lies. Youth often lives in the future. Maturity begins to notice the present. At some point, a person stops asking, what am I still missing in order to be happy? And begins asking, why did I decide that what I already have is not enough? And that is a very uncomfortable question, because it forces us to look not at our lives, but at our attitude toward them. What if happiness was never hidden in the next achievement? What if it had been here all along? In this day, in this moment, in this life, the one we so often miss while waiting for another one to begin. Sometimes it seems unfair to me that it takes a person almost half a lifetime to understand the most important things. Why do we learn the value of peace only after many years of anxiety? Why do we begin to appreciate the present only after spending so much time waiting for the future? Why do we learn to accept ourselves only after many years of trying to become someone else? If the research is truly correct and the level of happiness begins to rise after midlife, then a question arises that does not leave me alone. Why? Why should we have to wait until we are 40, 50, or 60 years old to feel freer? To finally notice the beauty of an ordinary day. I want to believe that one day humanity will learn how to pass this wisdom on earlier, that people in their 20s will know what many today only come to understand in their 60s or even 80s, that youth will not be spent in an endless race for approval, that maturity will not have to come through disappointment, that people will not have to wait decades to give themselves permission to be happy. because regardless of the country we were born in, the language we speak, our age, culture, or personal history, we all want the same thing. We want to love and be loved. We want to feel that our lives matter. We want to wake up in the morning and be happy that we are alive. And I like to imagine a world where the level of happiness does not decline in the middle of life, but remains high throughout life. A world where children grow up knowing their worth, where young people do not postpone life until later. Adults do not live only in anticipation of the weekend or retirement, and older people do not look back with regret over the years they have lost. Perhaps this sounds naive, but if there is one thing that age teaches us, it is that the most precious things in life were never hidden in the next achievement. They were always right beside us. In love, in gratitude, in the people we embrace, in the moments we live through, in the simple fact that we have been given another day. And perhaps true happiness begins precisely when we understand this not at the end of the journey, but as early as possible. Perhaps the purpose of growing older is not to accumulate more experience, but to understand as early as possible what happy people often realize too late.